She stood in the foyer of the boutique on Rodeo Drive, a petite figure draped in a simple, demure dress that whispered of another era. Late spring sunlight filtered through the stained-glass transom above her head, splintering into shards of gold and rose on the marble floor. The mannequins around her, dressed in silks that shimmered like liquid moonlight, seemed to regard her with curious disdain. A clerk in a crisp white shirt glanced at the hem of her skirt, well pressed but plainly cut, and let his practiced smile slip into thinly veiled impatience. "Unfortunately, today is by appointment only," he murmured, eyes flicking toward the velvet rope that separated the VIP showroom from the mere browsing area. He spoke as though reciting a rehearsed line, but the lie dripped from each word. Inside the salon were half a dozen patrons idling over champagne and swatches, their laughter muted by distance. She tilted her chin, drawing a soft breath. Behind her shoulder, the name that trembled on every lip in the world, Jackson, was a silent thunderbolt, carried by her very presence. Michael Jackson's mother, cloaked in anonymity and modesty, far from Neverland, had stepped into the heart of fashion's fortress. In her eyes burned a twin fire of quiet pride and private sorrow, an ache born not of a mother's longing for opulence, but of a daughter's memory of sewing scraps into dresses, and of a son's inheritance of the world's unkind glare. When the door closed behind her exit, a single assistant paused mid-step, registering not just a customer turned away, but a scandal in the making. Unseen, she reached for her phone. 72 hours later, the glittering realms of couture, television, and justice would be forever altered, and few would suspect that the spark had ignited with one small, proud woman's refusal to be invisible. The day was bright with promise. Palm fronds swayed in the breeze outside Neverland Ranch as Catherine settled into her favorite armchair. The morning papers spread across her lap. A soft ding from the corner of the study signaled a new message on the answering machine. She pressed the playback button, expecting the usual fan mail or a rehearsal confirmation. Instead, a voice she barely recognized, an anonymous tipster, recounted her own indignity. Turned away at Dior, threatened with the police, reduced from matriarch to tourist. Each word lodged like gravel in her throat. Michael, halfway through vocal warm-ups for Black or White, paused when the producer delivered the news. He listened in silence, the faint hum of synthesizers still vibrating in the background. No firestorm of anger rose. His face shadowed with something deeper. Betrayal at the sight of his mother's dignity so casually discarded. He dialed her number, each ring echoing through the stillness of her bungalow. When she answered, her voice was a hushed tremor. "I'd rather not talk about it," she whispered. Shame, not sorrow, colored her tone. She was not the kind of woman to wave a name like a banner, and that was what hurt most. Moments later, Michael pressed a hand to the glass of his recording booth, gazing at his own reflection. The man who owned stadiums and sold out arenas was stung more by the world's disregard than he had ever admitted to himself. Yet he understood that direct confrontation might humiliate his mother further. So he laid aside press conferences and lawsuits, and instead arranged for an agent to enter that Beverly Hills boutique under an invented persona, an eccentric billionaire in disguise, desiring the finest couture. The setup would be flawless. Hidden cameras, a staged dismissal, and more hard evidence than any headline could ignore. 2 days passed in a blur of clandestine planning. Then, at precisely 10:30 on a bustling Thursday morning, a tall man in an immaculate black suit, the stranger sent by Jackson's camp, stepped under Dior's glass awning, leather briefcase in hand. He carried the air of authority, brows creased with purposeful focus. Sales associates materialized at his heels, polished smiles, champagne flutes, the soft click of heels on marble. They led him through the velvet rope as though he were the star attraction. Beside him walked a young African-American woman, her posture modest, her eyes steady. She wore a simple sheath dress, unassuming yet elegant in cut, an echo of the very sketch Catherine had drawn decades before, though no one there recognized its provenance. When she mentioned a tiny alteration at the waist, the clerks exchanged eager glances. When she declined the mannequin's dainty train, they leaned forward, as though every request were a confession of confidence. Unseen, cameras tucked behind racks of couture recorded every tilt of her head, every solicitous tilt of theirs. A security guard hovered, face unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. But no one challenged her identity. They did not see how she mirrored Catherine's dignity, how each hand gesture was a step echoing the day her mother had been dismissed so easily. When Michael received the footage in his private screening room, the monitors flickered with the scene he knew all too well. The same inflection in the sales clerk's voice, the same dismissive half-smile of the security guard. It was not a replay of one offense, but a pattern exposed. His heart thundered with righteous indignation, and yet his plan was not to litigate, but to orchestrate an unveiling on a scale that would force every corner of the industry to stare at its own reflection. On a rain-scented evening, Dior's towering facade was bathed in a soft amber glow, oblivious to the storm gathering beneath its polished veneer. At midnight, an anonymous order arrived. $500,000 worth of haute couture, fine jewelry, and the delicate offerings of the fashion house's most coveted designers. The delivery address was a modest shelter for women escaping the shadows of the city, a refuge Catherine had once volunteered at in her youth. By dawn, the boutique's staff learned they had been outmaneuvered. Shipments bound for a five-star hotel had instead been rerouted to battered hands and hopeful smiles. Women in tattered coats, mothers clutching children close, elders who had never owned a gown more precious than their own worn dignity. Press wires lit up. Jet magazine ran the headline, "Black Flower Among White Walls," celebrating the anonymous benefactor who had turned luxury into lifeline. The story spread through Black American readerships with gleeful pride, even as mainstream outlets hesitated on the brink of acknowledgement. Days later, Michael invited a small group of journalists to Neverland, but not for scandal. Under the shade of magnolia trees, he led them past koi ponds and into a simple hall. There, he personally displayed not his trophies or platinum records, but the handwritten note he had received from his mother, tucked into a battered sketchbook. A gown's true purpose is not display, but dignity. He spoke of respect, of empathy, and of the quiet power that could rise from a single act of compassion. For the first time, the world heard Michael Jackson speak with candor about the wounds inflicted on his family's pride, and the resolve that burned brighter than any spotlight. By early June, summer's first heat waves had begun to shimmer through Los Angeles, but far from the sunlit boulevards of Rodeo Drive, another fire was flickering in print. In the pages of Jet magazine, under the elegant masthead and the trademark fuchsia banner, appeared an article titled, "The Queen Was Denied." The headline leapt from the page like a raised fist, and the accompanying photograph captured the moment Catherine Jackson had been turned away. Her posture dignified, shoulders square, palm resting against a glass door she could not enter. The skin of her face glowed with a muted fire, equal parts pride and hurt, an image that spoke more eloquently than any words could. Within hours of its release, the article rippled through Black America's cultural networks. In barbershops, men paused mid-snip to lean close, reading paragraphs aloud over the hum of clippers. In beauty salons from Detroit to New Orleans, women scrubbed nails and teased hair while nodding their heads, the shock from the printed lines settling into simmering outrage. Local radio hosts dedicated slots to dismantle the injustice. How could a mother be treated like a common tourist when her own son has carried billions of voices on his shoulders? Callers demanded. The conversation moved beyond celebrity gossip. It became a rallying cry for everyday respect. Meanwhile, the mainstream press maintained a studied silence. Papers in New York and Los Angeles made no mention of the Jet headline on their front pages. Television news shows ran morning segments about box office numbers and celebrity court cases, but omitted any reference to Catherine's plight. It was as though the glittering corridors of high society had banded together to preserve their veneer, keeping the cracks hidden from the world's gaze. But some corners of print culture could not stay silent. Essence magazine published an op-ed deconstructing the social architecture that allowed luxury to remain blind to human pain. Ebony carried a feature exploring the irony that the fashion world, so eager to showcase Black culture's influence in music and art, could ignore a living icon of that very influence standing at its doorstep. Yet with every supportive headline, there came a counterstrike. Anonymous commentators on newsboards and small-town publications called the story a fabrication. "Mother of Michael Jackson, please," wrote one snide columnist. "She couldn't have looked that plain. She must have staged it for publicity." The words, so casually dismissive, cut deeper than any closed door. For Catherine, the idea that her integrity could be questioned, her very presence reduced to a publicity stunt, wounded her more profoundly than the original insult. It was a reminder that even in solidarity, suspicion could breed contempt. Back at Neverland Ranch, Michael observed a change in his mother. The matriarch, who once welcomed cameras into her kitchen with warm embraces, now declined family photos at the dinner table. Each night, as staff set long linens and crystal glasses, he noticed her gaze flicker away from the cameras, her smiles faltering before they fully reached her eyes. When the assembled team beckoned her to join, she would offer a gentle excuse and slip away, the weight of public scrutiny pressing down on her like an unseen cloak. That evening, after an empty seat at the dining table had gone cold, Michael closed the door to his private study. He retrieved his leather-bound diary, a gift from his childhood, and in the dim glow of a desk lamp, he pressed pen to paper. "The world sees the shine, but the pain is what I inherited not from fame, but from my mother." For the first time, he acknowledged that his battle was no longer only about him. It was about the quiet sacrifices of the woman who taught him strength, and the invisible wounds inflicted by a world enamored with glamour but indifferent to human worth. In a glass and steel tower overlooking downtown L.A., the headquarters of Maison Elitaire quivered under the storm of public scrutiny. On the 21st floor, in a boardroom designed to impress visiting dignitaries, the brand's top executives and legal counsel convened an emergency crisis meeting. Their polished shoes tapped against the marble floor as they gathered around a conference table strewn with printouts of headlines, social media screenshots, and clips from various news segments. At the head of the table, the PR director, skirt precisely tailored, heels faintly clicking, adjusted her designer glasses and took a breath. "We need to contain this before it spreads beyond our core demographic," she said, her voice cool but urgent. "I propose we reach out to Mrs. Jackson's team with a settlement. $2 million, a quiet, non-disclosure agreement, and a limited public statement. We meet, indirectly, with her legal representative at the Beverly Wilshire. They'll appreciate the discretion." The general counsel, a man whose sterling reputation in merger negotiations never prepared him for this kind of vulnerability, nodded. "We'll frame it as a humanitarian gesture. No admission of guilt, just a mutual resolution. Yet, in a cramped office a few miles away, Catherine received the summons. A brief note from Mr. Caldwell, Esquires, requested her presence at the Beverly Wilshire, promising to resolve matters amicably. Catherine closed her eyes, recalling the day she was shunted aside at the boutique's threshold. She wrote a reply in steady script. "I will attend with my attorney." Then she paused. The thought of another middleman, another layer of obscurity, did not sit well with her. On the day of the meeting, the hotel's grand lobby gleamed with chandeliers and polished marble. An assistant escorted Catherine and her lawyer through a discreet back corridor, then settled them at a round table in a private salon. They waited in silence, sipping tea with perfunctory politeness, while minutes turned to a quarter hour. Finally, the door swung open, and in strode Michael Jackson. Sans entourage, clad in jeans and a simple blazer, hair brushed back, eyes steady. The PR team's breath caught. This was no lawyer, no intermediary. Michael sat down opposite Catherine's attorney and gazed across the table at the stunned executives. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the rustle of silk curtains. Then Michael spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I do not want your money." He paused, allowing those words to settle like ripples on still water. "I want you to look at yourselves." The room held its collective breath. In that moment, the gloss of power and wealth felt fragile, less an asset than a barrier preventing empathy from passing between human hearts. 48 hours later, a statement arrived from Maison Elitaire's public relations office. It read like a finely assembled garment, every clause cut with precision, every nuance calculated to maintain dignity. Maison Elitaire deeply regrets any inconvenience experienced by a certain individual who may have been inadvertently not admitted under our VIP policy. We hold all our clientele in the highest esteem and remain committed to inclusivity and respect. The phrasing was so exquisitely neutral that it drew derision from every corner. A certain individual? Inadvertently? Fashion blogs erupted in mockery, crafting memes of velvet ropes captioned, "We regret anyone not recognized as our certain individual." Late-night hosts read the apology aloud with sardonic emphasis. Even advertisers for the brand shifted uneasily when they heard themselves mention it. Michael watched the fallout from the screening room at Neverland. He could almost taste the bitter aftershock of hollow words masquerading as remorse. But he refused to climb into the ring of rebuttals. Instead, he turned to the medium he trusted most, the camera. With a small production crew, he filmed a video montage of archival footage, black and white home movies of Catherine teaching him to walk, carrying a bundle of groceries, holding his hand through the streets of Gary. He wove in clips of her in more recent years, her grace undiminished by time, each frame an irrefutable testament to her dignity. When the montage reached its climax, Michael's voiceover began, unhurried, resonant. This woman is not just the mother of Michael Jackson. She is the mother of America. You did not disrespect one person. You disrespected every woman who rose before dawn, who carried the weight of night shifts and heartbreak, who woke her children at dawn for school. You must repair more than a reputation. You must change a system that sees less than the soul. That night, the video aired simultaneously on BET and MTV. Viewers saw not a choreographed soundbite, but a living testament to compassion. Tears filled living rooms across the nation. For the first time, mainstream media posed the question, why does the elite so often fail to see people? Michael's next move was quieter, more intimate. Under cover of darkness, he chartered a bus and loaded it with crates of freshly cut lilies and roses, stacks of storybooks, comfort kits for mothers, and hand-knit blankets. The destination, the old elementary school in Gary, Indiana, where Catherine had once taught English to wide-eyed children learning their first cursive strokes. Invitations were extended to women who had taught, to single mothers juggling second jobs, to social workers whose compassion often went unheralded. The event unfolded in a softly lit gymnasium. Folding chairs lined in neat rows faced a humble stage draped in pastel cloths. No press were welcome, only hand-delivered invitations. As dusk settled beyond the tall windows, the guests arrived, arms heavy with life's burdens. They found bouquets at each seat and small packages containing journals and pens. A hush fell over the room when Katherine Jackson herself stepped onto the stage, wearing a pale blue dress that caught the light like dew on a melody. She spoke not of scandal or remedy, but of community and care. When she finished, she invited each woman to step forward, claim a flower, and share her own story. One by one, voices trembled. A teacher who raised her children on peanut butter sandwiches so she could keep the school open. A mother who worked nights at the hospital while her son studied by street lamp. A counselor who disabled her own pain to buoy others. Each confession transformed bouquets into lifelines. A week later, Catherine returned to her art studio at Neverland and found on her sewing table a framed photograph. It showed her that night in Gary, the soft glow of the gym lights haloing her as she handed a lily to an elderly woman whose hands shook. No signature, just the image and the silent affirmation it contained. Beneath it lay a letter in Michael's familiar looping script. "You taught me that true crown is not a tiara, but dignity, and if they will not let you into their palace, then build your own." She folded the letter against her heart, the petals of the lilies beside her trembling like the promise of dawn. In every word, every bloom, she found proof that compassion and resolve could cultivate justice far richer than any court's verdict. The black-and-white photograph of the candlelit gathering in Gary still rested on Catherine's mantel, its polished frame catching the morning sun. She paused each day before leaving for lunch, tracing the shadows on her mother's face in that single image, marveling how one night, without flashbulbs or red carpets, could sparkle more brightly than any gala. And yet, halfway across the country, another image was poised to take its place in the world's view. At dawn on Fifth Avenue, the hush of early traffic was broken by a low rumble of machinery as cranes hoisted the first panels of the new Maison Elitaire billboard into position. The street was closed for a few precious hours, giving way to workers in hard hats who clicked levelers into place and ran heavy-duty staples through vinyl. A massive black tarp still cloaked the face of the display, held taut by steel cables. Crowds began to form, their breaths misting in the cool air as if they anticipated not merely an advertisement, but a confession. Inside a nearby newsroom, editors hovered over satellite feeds, fingers ready above keyboards. Reporters rubbed sleep from their eyes, waiting for the live reveal from the luxury brand that had weathered weeks of scandal. Tonight, the world would see Maison Elitaire's new Equality Initiative. When the tarp finally dropped, the audience saw a model so compelling she seemed to hold the entire city in the bone structure of her cheekbones. Her deep ebony skin contrasted with the pale stone facade of the building behind her. She wore a sculpted gown that flowed over her figure in tiers of rich fabric. It was an arresting image of power and grace, and at its base, a simple tagline, "We see you." Applause and camera shutters echoed through digital channels. Hashtags exploded. Equality for fashion, Pretty Maison for all. The model's name, an emerging talent from Harlem, filled search bars and talk show panels, Yet one detail escaped most observers. The gown's silhouette was drawn in exact proportion to a sketch Catherine had tucked into her diary 3 decades earlier in Indiana. Michael saw it instantly when a friend sent him the billboard's photo. He leaned close to the screen, lips parted in disbelief. The neckline, with its gentle sweetheart curve, the pleats cascading down the left hip, the subtle petal of fabric at the waist, all mirrored the design Catherine had drafted by candlelight the night she first taught herself how to translate dreams into lines. He closed his eyes, recalling how his mother had shown him that design meant listening to the body, to history, to legacy. He extracted the old leather-bound notebook from his desk and flipped to the yellowed page where Catherine's words still scrawled, "A gown must honor the wearer more than the seam." Every stroke he recognized as her hand. Determined to confirm his suspicion, he placed a call. The line crackled, then connected to the voice of André Duval, the young designer who had once sat in the front row at Michael's show and wept when the star sent him backstage a scholarship check. André's tone carried a hushed tension. "Yes," he confessed after a moment of hesitation. "I used a sample from your mother's private collection. I thought it would pay homage, but they never wanted to credit her. They said it would distract from our narrative." Michael closed his phone with a soft click. The city roared around him, a symphony of horns and sirens. In that jagged moment, he felt the old ache rise again, the feeling that talent born of need could be plucked for spectacle, then discarded like confetti. And so, with the knowledge of a wrong that demanded redress, he set his course. Not toward an attorney, nor a headline-chasing statement, but toward an act that would require every mind to bend and every eye to look anew. The fashion world often spoke in hushed French phrases and glossy superlatives, so when Elin magazine's summer issue hit newsstands, its pages gleamed with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. A 2-page interview with the head designer of Maison Elitaire featured ornate typography and sumptuous portraits. Him in a charcoal suit draped over a velvet armchair, hand threading through his silver hair. "Originality is our lifeblood," he proclaimed, tone measured. "Our summer line draws inspiration from the true essence of French chic." Critics nodded politely, praising the collection's clean lines and subtle rebellion. But deep in the archives of Motown fandom, a different truth awaited discovery. A devoted collector named Simone Benson had spent her summers digitizing grainy photos of Catherine from 1972, the year she'd surprised herself by sewing her own designs. When she stumbled across an image of Catherine holding the very dress later echoed in that billboard, her hands shook. Late at night, Simone attached the scanned photo to an email and sent it to dozens of blogs, fan sites, and archival repositories. Almost immediately, the internet buzzed. Did Maison Elitaire just plagiarize a home sketch? Became the hottest question on message boards. Each click drained another drop of polish from the brand's reputation. But the coup de grace arrived in a leaked audio file from within the glittering walls of the flagship boutique. In the recording, the PR manager's voice is crisp and dismissive. "Even if it's true, no one will buy that an old woman from Gary invented couture. She's nobody. Michael's not even on top anymore." His words fell like skulls in a crypt, an admission that stripped away any remaining pretense. When the transcript spread, it set off a chorus of outrage. Industry insiders condemned the callousness. Late-night hosts seized the scandal as a cudgel. Social commentators dissected the elitism that could belittle a mother's quiet genius. And yet, amid the uproar, an unspoken question throbbed. How long would the people tolerate a world where prominence and visibility were rights purchased with privilege rather than proof of worth. In the dimly lit studio of an Atlanta radio station, the clock ticked past midnight. The microphone glowed red, as if thirsty for confession. Michael, under the alias David, adjusted his headphones. He wore a simple navy pullover, no sequins, no signature glove, just the weight of his voice and the conviction behind it. The host, a gravel-voiced DJ known for championing anonymous callers, leaned forward. "All right, David, talk to us. What's on your mind?" Michael closed his eyes, drawing in the quiet hum of the equipment. Then, with a clarity that suggested each word had been forged in fire, he spoke. "The elite will always want to borrow from those who have nothing to gain," he said. "They'll take our stories, our designs, our songs, and when we ask for credit, they'll act surprised we even spoke. But genius thrives in the shadows. It grows when the world sleeps." He told the story of his mother, how she had stitched love into every seam of his childhood jacket, how she'd sketched dreams onto napkins in diners before dawn. He spoke of Rodeo Drive, of billboards, of stolen creativity. And as he spoke, listeners called in, their voices cracking with pain and anger. A teacher from St. Louis shared how she'd designed a uniform for her students only to have it trademarked by a school board without acknowledgement. A seamstress from Miami recalled the time she'd sold a dress to a boutique for pennies, only to see a carbon copy in Vogue weeks later. Each story layered upon the last, forming a tapestry of hurt too vast to ignore. By morning, the hashtag #MyMama2 was smoldering across forums and social feeds. The phrase spoke of mothers besieged and children who grew up knowing the weight of erasure. David's identity remained hidden, yet his message reverberated in every retweet, every blog post, and though no one mentioned Michael Jackson by name, the power of his voice, unmasked by fame, pierced the headlines with the force of inevitable change. Under the bright lights of a Glendale studio, cameras rolled live for Oprah Winfrey's primetime special titled "Respect Not for the Name, but for the Gaze." Audience members, clad in their Sunday best, awaited a surprise guest. Oprah emerged first, her presence a sunbeam that rippled across the crowd. "Tonight," she began, "we honor those who build worlds with their hands and hearts, yet seldom receive their due." The audience leaned in, hush falling like velvet. Moments later, Katherine Jackson appeared, graceful in a tailored skirt and white blouse, eyes shining with both resolve and warmth. Michael, watching from behind the camera crew, had begged her not to go tonight. He feared the spotlight might fracture her composure. But she had insisted. She would stand as an example, not a victim. In her hand, Katherine held a folded letter, its edges soft from being read in the dark. With a steadiness that surprised even her, she read aloud, "These windows do not reflect us. They show us what we must strive to be seen. And yet, all I have ever wanted is for my children to walk without shame of who we are." Her voice quavered on the final words, and for a heartbeat, the studio held its breath. Then the applause broke like waves, a thunderous affirmation of her dignity. At the close of the broadcast, Oprah's announcer voice cut in. "We just received word that one of Maison Elitaire's shareholders plans to divest. He said he can no longer be part of something that silences brilliance." The revelation set social feeds ablaze, first in tweets, then on financial pages. As the cameras panned back to Katherine, bathed in studio light, her eyes glistening, she rose to speak softly. No grand gestures, no defiant pronouncements, just a nod toward every mother, every creator, every soul who had ever been told they did not belong. And in that quiet moment, the world watched, and finally it listened. Summer's heat pressed against courthouse steps in downtown Los Angeles, turning marble stairs into sweltering slabs of implacable stone. Activists and young lawyers in crisp shirts and handmade pins, some embroidered with the slogan "Number My Mama Too," gathered under the portico's overhang, briefcases in one hand and water bottles in the other. The air tasted of asphalt and protest signs, of coffee spilled in rush-hour chaos, of anticipation too eager to be polite. Inside the grand chamber, oak-paneled walls rose 3 stories high, crowned with vaulted ceilings decorated by frescoes of Lady Justice. Sunlight slanted through frosted glass, scattering gold dust across the rows of empty benches before the public doors swung open. A procession of attorneys took their places. On the plaintiff's side, a coalition neither led by Michael nor Katherine Jackson, but by ordinary citizens galvanized by the story of an elderly woman denied entry and dismissed by a brand that claimed exclusivity above empathy. The judge, a silver-haired woman whose gavel bore the faint ring of decades of verdicts, called the courtroom to order. Cameras from local stations perched at the edges, capturing every rustle of paper and downward glance. News outlets had labeled this the equality lawsuit, though no one expected a quick ruling. It was a symbol born entirely of principle, a stand for those whose voices had been silenced by polished PR statements. As opening arguments began, the lead attorney for the plaintiffs stepped forward, a young woman named Marcus Reed, her dark hair pulled back in a precise bun. Her voice rang clear and unwavering. She recounted Katherine Jackson's initial denial at the boutique, then wove in every subsequent affront: the viral article in Jet, the co-opted designs, the snide corporate audio. Each detail laid brickwork for a narrative of systemic disregard. She concluded not with a plea for compensation, but with Katherine's own words, written in a new letter for this very moment. "I do not need millions of dollars. I want my words to reach those who have not yet faced contempt. I want you to feel shame, not before me, but before yourselves." A hush fell across the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jurors exchanged glances of surprise. Even members of the brand's legal team seemed unmoored by the raw sincerity of those lines. When the defense rose, they offered the usual entreaties: charitable donations, revamped inclusion programs, scholarships. Their lead attorney, a seasoned figure with silver cufflinks and a voice smooth as silk, promised that Maison Elitaire would host diversity workshops, fund minority designers, and publish a manifesto on equity. Yet every vow felt as rehearsed as the scripted apology that had already ignited derision in the public square. Journalists whispered that the courtroom scene was a turning point. Money and policy could be written on paper, but genuine contrition could not be brokered with PR firms. At adjournment, the judge made no ruling. She cited the need for deliberation and more evidence. Yet for Katherine's supporters, the absence of a verdict was its own statement. Justice, in its purest form, too often lingers between intention and action. Outside, Reed led a press conference. She held aloft the same letter Katherine had read in court. "They offered dollars," Reed said, voice steeled. She offered truth. This trial has no winner until society accepts that dignity cannot be priced. Cameras clicked, microphones leaned in, and somewhere a spark ignited among those who still hoped law could bend culture. While the lawsuit fueled headlines, Michael Jackson sat alone in the Neverland sound studio, the afternoon sun painting stripes of gold across the mixing console. He wore a gray hoodie, earbuds in his ears, eyes closed as he let the hum of machinery settle around him. Outside, staffers passed by in hushed urgency, requests for statements, calls demanding interviews, but he stayed silent. He knew the power of his voice, And he also knew the value of restraint. As the world clamored for pronouncements, Michael, lead the movement. He gathered his thoughts in the language he knew best. Melody. On a battered notepad beside the soundboard, he sketched 2 words in block letters. Thread. It was the title of what would become a song both intimate and vast. Every night for a week, he poured himself into that track. Under the glow of solitary lamps, he recalled childhood nights when his mother sat at her sewing machine, the wheel turning beneath her fingertips as she stitched hope into every seam. He layered soft percussion, a heartbeat pulse, to anchor the rhythm, then rose from the speakers a gentle piano motif, its notes intertwining like strands of yarn. Over it, his voice wove a tale of quiet labor. She whispered to the fabric, "Hold fast to dreams when daylight breaks." In every stitch, a secret song. A mother's love no power can fake. He wrote of invisible threads binding people, threads of compassion tugging at the heart when the world turned a blind eye. He spoke of mothers who labored in silence, of stolen designs copied without credit, of dignity woven from resilience. When the song was done, he didn't release it to radio or MTV. Instead, he burned a single cassette and carefully labeled it with a silver pen. To Mom, my shard of silver thread. On the cassette case's back, he scribbled, "Thank you for binding me together. This is yours." On a humid evening in July, he drove to Catherine's small guest bungalow on the ranch. Under the adobe orange sky, he placed the cassette in her outstretched hands. She turned it over, her eyes tracing the looping script of her son's hand. "Is this coming out?" she asked breathlessly. He shook his head, voice thick. "No, Mama. It's just for you." Tears found the corners of her eyes, tears not of sorrow, but of pride. She hugged him tight, and for a moment, the world outside shrank to the hush of 2 hearts finding home. Months slipped by. Then, in a quiet act of digital piracy, a studio engineer slipped the demo onto a fan forum. The clip was lo-fi, warm with analog hiss, and its lyrics cut deeper than any public announcement. Fans dubbed it the greatest surprise since Stranger in Moscow. In underground circles, the song spread like wildfire, a testament that the most profound songs are those never meant for fame. A year after the scandal's first spark, Manhattan's skyline had shifted. Posters for the new House of Mothers atelier adorned taxi tops and subway platforms, bearing the image of a model in a timeless sheath dress echoing Katherine Jackson's 1970s sketches. The atelier's founders, 4 young designers of diverse backgrounds, had convened in a loft studio above Houston Street. Their walls were splashed with fabric swatches, mood boards festooned with Polaroids of Katherine wearing the silhouette when she was but a teacher in Gary. Their mission was simple yet radical: to honor the invisible architects of fashion, the mothers and grandmothers whose intuition and ingenuity remained uncredited. Their debut collection, titled Matriarch's Thread, wove lace reminiscent of home-sewn aprons with the graceful lines of mid-century couture. Each piece came with a story card, names and tales of women from all walks of life, factory workers, seamstresses, stylists, whose designs had been plucked for runway shows without acknowledgement. The first public unveiling took place in a reclaimed warehouse in Bushwick. Burlap drapes hung from scaffolding. Mason jars overflowed with wildflowers. Strings of Edison bulbs flickered overhead, casting a sepia glow. Attendees included culture critics, activists, and everyday patrons, all invited with a single stipulation. They must share one story of a design or idea they'd seen appropriated without credit. As models stepped onto the plywood floor, the hush turned to murmurs of recognition. A silver-gray blazer in the collection matched the cut of Catherine's original sketch, tapered at the waist, shoulders softened by gentle tucks. A rust-colored skirt featured pleats arranged exactly as Catherine had first drafted on napkin scraps in 1975. The crowd exhaled in unison. This was homage, not exploitation. On opening night, the designers stood at the front of the runway. One of them, a former fashion intern named LaToya, took the microphone. "We honor not only Michael Jackson's legacy," she said, voice steady, "but the woman who taught him that every stitch matters. We honor the mothers who sew dreams into fabric so their children might wear hope." The applause was thunderous. The next morning, Fifth Avenue windows displayed House of Mothers designs, alongside a photograph of Catherine at her sewing machine in Gary. Beneath the gown in the window, a simple placard read, "This dress was once cast aside. Now, millions see it, and with it, those once turned away." Tourists and locals paused to photograph it, the tableau a powerful rebuttal to the very idea of exclusion. Across the river, boutiques formerly blasé about inclusivity scrambled to respond, but the moment had passed for half-hearted gestures. The revolution in display windows had grown roots too deep to be uprooted by PR statements or tokenistic campaigns. Years later, under the gentle skies of Gary, Indiana, a new wing opened at the city's public library, the Hall of Quiet Heroines. Brick walls, painted in soft cream, arched above polished wood floors. Soft lighting illuminated exhibits dedicated not to celebrity or fortune, but to the countless women whose labor and vision had shaped communities. At the hall's entrance, an engraved plaque declared, "To the invisible hands that stitched our lives together." Visitors entered past glass cases containing weathered tools, a wooden ruler with worn edges, a yellowed pattern book annotated in cramped script, and, centrally, the very Singer sewing machine Catherine had used decades before. Its green enamel was chipped in places. Beneath the presser foot, a fragment of uncut fabric still clung like a relic. A modest crowd gathered for the inauguration. Local dignitaries spoke of how Gary had nurtured not only Michael Jackson's dreams, but also those of a mother whose quiet strength rippled outward. The ribbon was cut not by a mayor, but by a young designer from Los Angeles, the same Simone who'd once been turned away from that Rodeo Drive boutique. Now, her atelier produced clothes for philanthropic causes, fitting families in shelters and schools in need. Simone's hands trembled as she held the scissors. When she spoke, her voice cracked. "I stand here for every woman who ever picked up a needle in the dark because she believed her work mattered." She gestured to the sewing machine. "And every daughter who watched, knowing that respect must be earned, never given for the cut of one's dress or the breadth of one's fame." At the hall's far end, beneath a soft spotlight, lay an audio recording station. Visitors stepped forward to don headphones where Catherine's voice, gentle, unwavering, read a letter she had penned long ago, but addressed only to her future self. "I do not wish to be remembered as the mother of a celebrity. I wish to be remembered as someone unafraid of being ordinary." Her words floated through the gallery, weaving between the exhibits like a delicate thread. And in that hall built not of marble but of memories, every visitor felt the weight and wonder of quiet heroism and understood that true legacy is stitched, gradually, by hands unseen.